Joseph Stalin kept a secret so disturbing that even his own inner circle refused to talk about it after he died. And no, it's not what you learned in school. This isn't the sanitized textbook version or the dramatic movie villain version. This is the unsettling human version. The strange habits, the private cruelties, the moments so bizarre you almost doubt they happened at all. And just to be clear, we're exploring the disturbing human details behind a brutal dictator, not glorifying him. So let's start with a fact that sounds too strange to be true, and then it only gets worse. Number 1. Stalin's death might have been slowed by his own inner circle. This one is going to sound completely made up, but I promise you it's documented. March 1953. Stalin collapses on the floor of his Kuntsevo dacha, suffering a massive stroke. Hours pass, not minutes, hours. And why? Because the guards outside his room were too terrified to enter without explicit permission from the unconscious man dying on the carpet. That's fear so intense it becomes absurd. Darkly absurd. Lavrenti Beria, head of the secret police, professional nightmare fuel, reportedly walked in, glanced at Stalin's body, and said, "He's just sleeping," before leaving. Imagine watching one of the most powerful men on Earth fighting for his life and thinking, yeah, I'm not risking my job over that. The irony lands hard. The man who demanded absolute control created a world where no one could save him without his permission. A dictator brought down not by an assassin or an uprising, but by the terror he spent decades perfecting. And that fear, it didn't start at the end. It defined his entire life. Continue, and you'll see just how early Stalin began rewriting the story of who he really was. Number 2. Stalin secretly rewrote his own childhood. You'd think a man who ruled an empire with an iron fist would at least be honest about where he came from. But here's the twist. Stalin spent years rewriting his own origin story like a nervous influencer photoshopping their high school yearbook. He insisted his father, Bessarion Djugashvili, was a poor but honest shoemaker. Humble, noble, salt-of-the-earth stuff. Except, no. The real Bessarion was an abusive alcoholic who beat young Joseph and his mother with a consistency that would make any therapist sigh deeply and reach for a fresh notepad. Early biographers wrote about it openly. Until Stalin saw those drafts. Then, suddenly, those chapters disappeared, replaced by a sanitized tale of a hardworking dad and a modest Georgian childhood, like he was trying to craft the perfect, gritty political origins movie. The irony is thick. The man who reshaped the Soviet Union couldn't tolerate the unfiltered truth about his own beginnings. And speaking of rewriting, he didn't stop with his childhood. His obsession with controlling the story would soon take a far more literal, visual turn. Number 3. Stalin edited himself into and others out of photographs. I know what you're thinking right now. How do you rewrite your own childhood and just get away with it? Well, buckle up, because Stalin didn't just rewrite stories. He rewrote reality, literally, with photographs. Before Photoshop, before Facetune, before your cousin's suspiciously natural Instagram glow-up, there was Stalin's personal army of retouchers. Their job? Make inconvenient people disappear. Poof, gone. One day you're posing next to the leader of the Soviet Union, and the next you've been airbrushed into the void like you never existed. The most famous example is from 1937. Stalin stands beside Nikolai Yezhov, head of the NKVD, a man nicknamed the Bloody Dwarf, which tells you everything. Yezhov becomes politically inconvenient. Translation, he's about to be executed. And suddenly, new versions of the photo surface where the riverbank behind Stalin looks strangely empty. Yezhov? Deleted like a bad tweet. Visual receipts of reality meant nothing. Stalin's insecurity was more powerful than film grain, chemistry, or photographic evidence. But his obsession with image didn't just apply to propaganda. It bled into the people closest to him, including his own children. Number 4. Stalin's son attempted suicide, and Stalin mocked him. Here's something that's going to make you question everything you just heard, because this next fact isn't about propaganda or politics or purges. It's about family, and it's brutal. Stalin's oldest son, Yakov, grew up desperate for his father's approval. Desperate. And when he was a teenager, overwhelmed by pressure and rejection, he tried to end his own life by shooting himself. He survived. Barely. Most fathers would react with shock, grief, maybe guilt. Stalin? He looked at his wounded son and reportedly said, "He can't even shoot straight." That's not just cold, that's glacial. The kind of emotional vacancy that makes you wonder if the man had a single intact human nerve left. And this wasn't a one-off moment of cruelty. Yakov spent years trying to reconnect with his father, but the wall never came down. ever. It's a reminder, a necessary one, that behind every dictator are people crushed by the fallout, even in their own homes. No glorifying here, just the human wreckage he left. And the family tragedies only get darker, because the next one involves Stalin's wife, and the truth the Soviet Union tried desperately to bury. Number 5. His wife's death was not the story you heard. We've all been to an uncomfortable dinner, right? Maybe someone drinks too much, maybe a couple argues, maybe you quietly plan your escape route. But Stalin's version of an uncomfortable dinner ends in one of the darkest moments of his entire private life. Nadezhda Alliluyeva, his wife, was only 31. On November 8, 1932, after a public argument with Stalin at a Kremlin banquet, in front of officials, in front of guests, in front of everyone, she walked out, went to another room, and shot herself. The official Soviet report? Illness. A sudden one, apparently. And Stalin's response at the dinner? He reportedly told guests she was just resting, while her body lay in the next room. The emotional disconnect isn't just chilling, it's like he was trying to will a new reality into existence, as if acknowledging anything human would crack the steel persona he'd built. This wasn't strength. It was repression so extreme it bordered on performance art. Dark, tragic performance art. But even that doesn't compare to his personal habits, because when Stalin let loose, the results were unforgettable. Number 6. Stalin's drinking nights were terrifying. Everything we've covered so far has been relatively tame, but this next part, this is where the chaos dial gets yanked straight into the red. Because when Stalin decided it was party time, nobody relaxed. Nobody. His drinking nights were less grab a beer with the boss and more survive the world's most dangerous office party. Stalin hosted marathon drinking sessions at his dachas, often lasting until dawn. Hours of vodka, toasts, more vodka, toasts to the toasts. If you tried to leave early, suspicious. If you stayed too long, also suspicious. Beria, Molotov, Khrushchev, these weren't guests, they were hostages with dinner privileges. He'd force them into bizarre games, random dances, little improvisational humiliations designed to remind everyone exactly who ran the room. Khrushchev once recalled staggering home at sunrise, completely wrecked, praying, literally praying, that Stalin wouldn't invite him again the next night. The irony? The man who preached discipline, order, and Soviet toughness loved nothing more than chaotic, booze-soaked circus nights where everyone else feared saying the wrong word or raising the wrong eyebrow. And what he did during these, quote, parties gets even stranger. Number 7. He loved pranks, the cruel kind. But here's the real question. What does a paranoid dictator do for fun? Because if you're imagining chess, pipe smoking, maybe a quiet walk, nope. Stalin's idea of entertainment was basically high-stakes humiliation disguised as jokes. During those late-night drinking marathons, he'd suddenly switch from cheerful host to 14-year-old gremlin mode. Pouring wine on guests' heads, sneaking up behind people to mock their accents or fears, forcing officials into awkward dances, then laughing when they stumble because what are they going to do? Tell him to knock it off? People got tortured for less. One night, according to multiple memoirs, he dumped an entire carafe of wine over a general's head as a joke, then stared directly at him, waiting to see if the man would laugh or cry. Imagine the psychological gymnastics required to chuckle while red wine runs down your uniform and the guy controlling your fate watches like he's grading your performance. This wasn't mischief, it was power play comedy, dictator edition. A reminder that even his jokes had victims. But when it came to food, the contrast gets even weirder. Number 8. Stalin obsessed over food poisoning. Here's a bold claim. Out of everything Stalin feared, assassins, rivals, rebellions, the thing that kept him up at night the most was dinner. Yes, dinner. The man who ran gulags with a signature pen was absolutely terrified his next meal might kill him. Every dish that reached his table had to be tasted first by a team of dedicated food testers. Not one tester, a team. They'd eat, they'd wait. Stalin would watch them like a hawk for 30 minutes, an eternity when you're staring at someone chewing cabbage soup, before taking a single bite himself. And the paranoia didn't stop there. He had his own personal citrus orchard guarded like a military installation. Guards, fences, restricted access, over fruit. Imagine being so afraid of poisoning that your oranges need bodyguards. The irony? Stalin built the very system he feared. When you rule through terror, you assume everyone else thinks like you. Spoiler, they don't. But paranoia doesn't care about spoilers. Terrifying micromanagement culinary edition. And speaking of paranoia, the next fact shows what Stalin did when fear moved from his dinner plate to his desk, where he had absolute lethal control. Number 9. Stalin personally signed execution lists. Remember that paranoia simmering under every meal? Well, take that same energy and crank it up to a place where it stops being strange and becomes deadly. Because when Stalin sat at his desk, the fear wasn't hypothetical anymore. It had names, thousands of them. During the Great Purge of the late 1930s, Stalin personally signed more than 40,000 execution lists. His signature, thick, looping, unmistakable, appears next to names of writers, soldiers, scientists, old friends, even people he'd toasted with the night before. And sometimes he'd add notes like, "shoot them all," as casually as someone scribbling a grocery reminder. This is bureaucracy weaponized, horror translated into paperwork. It's the banality of mass violence laid bare, a dictator turning life and death decisions into a nightly routine, the way someone else might sort their mail. It's important to say it plainly. This wasn't efficiency. It wasn't strength. It was systematic cruelty carried out with the cold precision of a man who believed reality itself answered to him. But here's the twist. Even when he wasn't signing death warrants, he was still rearranging the world to fit his version of reality. And sometimes that meant banning his own propaganda. Number 10. Stalin banned and then unbanned his own film. This next one is going to sound completely made up, but it's absolutely real. Imagine being so powerful, so mythologized, that a movie studio spends millions creating a film where you're portrayed as a glowing, heroic, borderline divine figure, and then you watch it and go, too flattering. That's exactly what Stalin did with the 1950 epic The Fall of Berlin. In this film, Stalin appears as the ultimate savior. Crowds weep at his presence. Soldiers cheer like he's a Marvel character descending from the sky. And every emotional arc bends towards Stalin equals Messiah. Any other dictator would have eaten that up like cake. Stalin? Nope. He walked out and immediately banned it because he thought it made him look too good, too perfect, too godlike. Even his ego had trust issues. But here's the twist that reveals everything. A couple of years later, when the political winds shifted and he needed a little image polish, he quietly unbanned it. Suddenly the movie was acceptable again. Even his propaganda had a plot twist. And now, the strangest fact of all, the one that reveals what Stalin feared more than enemies, assassins, or even poison, his own legacy. Number 11. Stalin's worst fear was his own legacy. If you're still watching at this point, you're probably wondering, after all the paranoia, the purges, the propaganda, what could possibly scare Stalin himself? The answer isn't what you expect, because in his final years, the man who controlled millions became obsessed with something he couldn't control, what people would say about him after he was gone. He kept a literal notebook listing enemies who might distort his legacy. Names, notes, paranoia distilled into a diary. He told Vyacheslav Molotov, one of his oldest allies, "They will try to destroy my name. Not my country, not my achievements, his name." The ultimate irony, the dictator who rewrote history feared history rewriting him. What makes this even more surreal is how small the fear feels compared to the scale of his power. After shaping the Soviet Union with absolute brutality, his final worry was being misunderstood, like a kid terrified someone might misquote him in the yearbook. But the truth is simple. When you spend your life controlling reality, the idea of losing control becomes the scariest thing imaginable. And that brings us back to where we started, toward the moment fear finally consumed him completely. We started with Stalin dying on the floor while everyone around him was too terrified to help. And now we know that fear wasn't a glitch in his system. It was the system. The world he built, the world he weaponized, and ultimately, the world that swallowed him in the end. His childhood lies, the photo erasures, the cruelty toward his own family, the drunken humiliations, the paranoia, the execution lists, the ego so fragile he banned his own movie. All of it points to a man fighting a war against reality itself. It's dark, it's bizarre, it's almost absurd. But it's also a reminder that power without limits doesn't just corrupt, it distorts, warps, and twists everything it touches until even the person holding it can't escape the consequences. If you want more deep dives into the human details behind the world's most notorious leaders, the parts they never put in textbooks, Make sure to subscribe and tell me who we should unravel next.